Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski. I will be your host for today. Those new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing science, adventure, conservation, exploration into classrooms across North America and beyond. So thanks so much, classrooms, for joining us today. We've got a great group of classrooms in Canada and the United States. Very excited to be joined by our guests today, Alex and Tyler Mifflin. They are the Water Brothers. So through their eco-adventure television series on TVO, they've explored the world, uncovering the most important water stories of our time. From dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico to a holy festival on the River Ganges, they've sought to bring these important issues to light and then to learn about the solutions that scientists, experts, government officials, and communities are implementing to protect our water systems. So Alex and Tyler, it is great to have you joining us for your first Hangout today.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot for organizing this.
Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, no, we're really excited to get a chance to speak to all the school groups today. We do a lot of speaking engagements at school, so anytime we get to chat with you guys is really rewarding for us because we definitely have a lot of information and knowledge we want to share with you guys.
All right. Well, I'm just watching on YouTube. Our viewers are starting to climb. So hello to the classrooms who are joining us live. Just a little note, you can get some questions in by putting them in the YouTube live chat sidebar. So I'll keep an eye out for those as we go on. But for now, guys, we'd love to hear a little bit about just what you do.
All right. Take it away.
Perfect. Yeah, so as Joe mentioned, we are the creators and hosts of the eco-adventure documentary series, The Water Brothers. For the last 6 years, Alex and I have been traveling all across the globe. We've been to just over 30 countries, making documentaries about some of the biggest environmental challenges we face in the world today. These environmental challenges through the lens of water, because really water is what connects every living thing on the planet, everything that's alive today, things that were alive millions of years ago, and things that are going to be alive in the future. Really, water is the connecting element of all living things on this planet. And so that we find that by looking at these environmental challenges that we face through the lens of water, it helps us understand how we're connected to these issues that maybe might not seem so apparent, how we're connected to challenges that are happening on the other side of the world. It shows us how we're connected to wildlife and really shows us what we can do to help overcome these really big environmental challenges. So we're going to go and show you, we have a short presentation with some slides we want to show you guys. And we're going to start off telling you guys about why we care about water. So I'm just going to get this set up here. Bear with me for a second. I'm going to share my screen with you all. And we're going to kick down here and show, well, you know what, I think, yeah, okay, we'll start with the trailer. We'll show you guys.
For those of you who haven't seen any of our work before, we'll start with a little trailer to show you some of the things we've shot.
Perfect.
We're getting our last look at the mainland right now. Next stop, Cocos Island.
It's so cool to think that we're floating at the lowest point on Earth right now.
Life as we know it requires liquid water for its survival.
We're really excited to get in the water because the entire reef ecosystem changes at night. Oh, that's cute. Woo!
If we can't get this problem solved, we'll be out of business.
So quite amazingly, we've come to the new headwaters of the lower Jordan River.
How could it be allowed to get like this? They're the start of what will be a very difficult journey for them.
This is ours, and this is where we're all from. You have to be a good steward of it because there's nobody else to take care of it but us.
Yeah. So a big part of what we do with the show is to have fun and to be positive, because when you're looking at global water issues, ocean conservation, the depletion and pollution of fresh water around the world, it can be very depressing to learn about the challenges we face and how, the loss of wildlife and how it affects humans in sometimes very sad and sad ways. So, but we try and put a positive spin on things and show people that there is hope, and also have fun while doing it. Find ways that we can have adventures while also talking about serious issues. So we're just going to show you another clip right now that is one way that we're able to have fun with the show and try and keep things light and positive, even though we're looking at a very serious issue. In this case, it's invasive species. And this clip is from an episode we did called Carpageddon, and it's about a group of invasive fish species in the Mississippi, Illinois river systems that were brought here in the 1970s to put in fish farms, and they've since spread everywhere. They got out of the cages, they got out of the farms, and they've really taken over the whole ecosystem and have had devastating effects. So here's a clip from Carpageddon showing you one way that we're able to have fun while looking at a serious issue.
You don't dare take your kids out there. It's too dangerous. They've broken noses. They've left bruises all over. They've knocked people out of their boats. And boy, I'll tell you what, it's just like popcorn from popcorn popper. You never know which way they're coming from. You just know that you're going to get smacked and slimed and bloodied.
They hit me once in a while. I hit them back. Really, we need to get them out of the water and take care of this problem we got. I don't want them to get into that Great Lakes, that's for sure.
It's just a bad deal. I mean, once these things start, you can't get rid of them. You don't want them to get in your waters, because if you do, you've got them.
Carp have completely changed the commercial and recreational fishing industries throughout the central United States. But for Peoria, Illinois resident Nathan Wallach, jumping silver carp are not just a nuisance, they're a business opportunity. In 2008, he and his friends started the Peoria Carp Hunters. Their goal? To turn the Asian carp invasion into a skilled and fun fishing experience, using an age-old technique called bow fishing.
It seems gruesome, but groups like the Peoria Carp Hunters are just trying to make the most out of a bad situation. This is what recreational fishing now looks like on the Illinois River.
We just finished some bow fishing. I caught a couple. Unfortunately, Al didn't have any luck catching some, so he's gonna go and try and catch some wakeboarding. How you doing, Al?
Good. You know, Mounties are better at catching carp than bow fishers, so let's go.
All right, let's do it. And he takes a hit.
So yeah, that's just one way that we're able to have fun with that issue in the episode Carpageddon. But invasive species are a very serious problem all around the world. And people are taking species where they're not supposed to be, and either intentionally or unintentionally introducing them to different habitats where they can take over the ecosystem, push out native species, and cost us a lot of money. In North America, the cost of invasive species in sort of controlling their numbers and the damage they do is over $120 billion a year. But, you know, there are some really positive stories about recovery, you know, dealing with invasive species, but which we don't really have time to get into right now.
So another thing we want to talk to you guys about, I mean, I briefly mentioned some of this earlier about why we focus on water, why we care about water. But we want to go into a bit more detail really briefly on why we care so much about water. And I mean, the first one is, let's be a little bit selfish. Water is our playground. It definitely is where we go and have fun. Think about where you have fun with your friends and your family. I can almost guarantee water is somewhere around there. But more importantly, water is in everything that we eat, we wear, we consume, and we buy. And oftentimes, a lot more water goes into making these products than we really think. Maybe you guys have heard about a concept called virtual water, or sometimes referred to as embedded water. So this gives you an idea of just how much water goes into some of the products that we consume on a daily basis. Just let's take a look at the first one, a glass of milk, 200 liters. How do you fit 200 liters of water into one glass of milk? Well, milk traditionally comes from cows, and cows eat a lot of food, and that food requires a lot of water to be grown. Plus, they also have to be kept clean. That milk has to be processed, has to be transported. All of that requires energy and water. And in order to produce energy, we usually use a lot of water as well. So that's just from the milk from a cow. But if you look at a hamburger, 2,400 liters of water. And so that just gives you a sense of just how much water goes into some of these products we use on a daily basis. But again, it's not just the food. It's also where that water comes from that's also really important. And it's where this water comes from that connects us to challenges all across the globe. So right here in Canada right now, we're in the middle of winter. It's not great for growing a lot of fruits or vegetables or produce. So a lot of times we import those foods from places like California or from Mexico. Our computers, our technology, a lot of the products we use on a daily basis aren't made here in Canada. They're made in places like China, where there's definitely a lot of environmental challenges, going on. So we're connected to these environmental challenges happening all across the globe through the things that we consume, that we eat, that we wear. A perfect example is clothes. We're not going to ask you this question because it's too hard, but and maybe in your class, if you want to take a guess, how much water actually goes into making a pair of jeans? Is it A, 800, B, 1,400 liters, C, 3,600, or D, 8,500? Well, the answer is D. It's 8,500 liters of water, which can be kind of a hard number to imagine, but it's about 50 bathtubs of water that goes into making just a single pair of jeans. So just something to think about. There's a lot of water that goes into the products that we use on a daily basis.
But, of course, we don't have to worry about that here in Canada, right? We're often told in places like Canada that we have, 20% of the world's surface freshwater supply, so we don't have these issues. But, of course, we do. And it goes into this way of thinking, which is we always have a lot less water than we think. We live on the blue planet, but most of that water is salt water. And if you look at this map here, everything you see in purple and yellow, those are macro watersheds, and all the rainfall there, or almost all of it, flows out into the Arctic Ocean, away from where people live. So we have a lot less water in Canada than we think. Most of us live right along the U.S. border or pretty close to it. So we're all using and sharing and polluting a much smaller portion of our overall water supply than we think. And the same sort of rule or same way of thinking applies globally as well. This is an image of the Earth and all the water on the planet, all the oceans, all the lakes, the rivers, the streams, everything. If you put it all together, it would be the size of that cube right there. So that puts things in perspective, that we have a lot less water than we think, sort of at a global level as well. But when you break it down, only 3% of all fresh water on the planet, of all water on the planet, is fresh water. So that big sphere you see there is all the water. That smaller sphere is all the fresh water. But if you actually look closely, you can see an even smaller sphere. It's just like a little blue dot there. That's all the fresh water that's actually easily accessible to us. So all the water we're using, that we can easily access, that we use to grow our food, for everything, that's it. That's because most of the water, most of the fresh water on this planet is far away from us. It's in ice caps in Greenland and Antarctica. It's in glaciers, high mountain glaciers, which melt slowly over time. We can't always access all of that as it melts. And it's melting a lot faster than it should too. And then there's, of course, groundwater. So a lot of fresh water is deep underground, which we can access. In fact, we're actually so good at tapping into those groundwater reserves that we're pumping them out much faster globally than they're replenished. Some of these aquifers, groundwater, they're also called aquifers. They can take thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years to fill up. Yet we're depleting them over sort of years or a couple decades, that we're depleting some of these groundwater reserves. And that's where we're running into some really serious problems, because when we built up whole cities, whole civilizations around things like groundwater or particular rivers, and we're pumping them so fast that once they run dry, there are no other sources of water, and it's going to take a long time for them to fill up. So we have to keep that in mind. Fresh water, we have the same amount of fresh water we've always had on this planet, though. And that's another really important point, because all the water on this planet is 3.8 billion years old. We have the same amount of water on this planet as we've had for a very long time. And it's not going to change anytime in the near future. All the water on this planet likely came here when the Earth first formed. It was squeezed out of the rocks. And when the early Earth first formed, water cycle ever since. And the only way that we've ever had additional sources of water arrive here is through asteroid impacts. So we don't actually want any more sources of water on this planet. We don't want more water because the only way more water can get on the planet is through an asteroid impact, which would be very dangerous, would probably kill a lot of us. So we're good with what we have. And all the water that's been here has been going through the water cycle for billions of years, hundreds of millions of years. We share the same water molecules. We're drinking the same water that dinosaurs would have consumed and would have peed out. So in a lot of ways, we're drinking dinosaur pee. We share it with all living things, past and into the future as well. So how we care for water today has long-lasting implications. And it's never really sort of been like that before in Earth's history, which is why humans have such a huge responsibility on our hands. So why water? Water is life. We are water. We're 60 to 70% water at any given time. So we are just walking blobs of water. That's a really important reason to care. So how we treat our local water resources is going to have direct impacts on our own health and the health of all living things around us, because we're all made up of the same water. And all things in the future will be made up of the same water too. But water is also at the heart of all the environmental challenges we face in the world today. That's another really important thing.
And one of the big ones that we want to talk to you very briefly about is climate change. And what we really want you guys to come away with from this talk is that climate change, and I'm sure you guys have learned a lot about it or heard a lot about it in the news, climate change is really a story about water. Because the ways that we're actually going to experience and suffer from climate change all have to do with how water is on the move on this planet like never before. And you guys have probably seen in the news or heard from your parents or learned in classrooms how we're seeing more intense extreme weather events. So we're seeing more hurricanes, we're seeing more forest fires, we're seeing more intense droughts, we're seeing more intense flooding events. So water is really what's driving a lot of the way that water is moving around this planet is really being affected by climate change. And water is on the move because of our climate is changing. And in Canada, we're very much susceptible to climate change. This is a really beautiful hydrological map of Canada that will show you, if you look at it closely, you can see our country is just littered in lakes and rivers. And we're bordered, we have 3 oceans. We border on the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic Oceans. We have the world's longest coastline. Canada has 60% of all the lakes in the world are found in Canada. So if climate change is really a story about water, you can definitely bet that Canada is going to be impacted by climate change.
Mm-hmm. And, it's not just the Arctic either. It's the lakes in the far south of the country, and it's definitely going to impact the U.S. as well, whether it's, rising sea levels in places like Florida, to how it's affecting lakes and how it's affecting the weather, how it's going to affect agriculture in particular. So we're seeing a lot of impacts even on fish. Some lakes are getting too warm for fish at the surface, and because of the warming, it means more algae, and that depletes oxygen. We have more intense algae blooms, which can be toxic for fish, for wildlife. Warmer water is really good for algae to grow. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing more of these toxic algae blooms all across North America. It's one of the biggest water quality issues we're facing. And of course, we're also experiencing climate change in the ocean. The ocean absorbs a great deal of the heat, most of the heat, excess heat that humans are responsible for through our greenhouse gas emissions. And we're also changing the chemistry of seawater, because the ocean doesn't just absorb heat, it also absorbs carbon dioxide itself. And that, when so much CO2 enters the ocean, it's actually changing the chemistry of seawater and making it more difficult for shelled marine organisms to build their shells. So we're going to show you, it's actually this process of, the ocean absorbing carbon dioxide and that changing the chemistry of seawater is called ocean acidification. It changes the pH of the water. And this is a very, very serious problem that we think is not being talked about nearly enough. And one of the reasons why is because you have to sort of have a basic understanding of chemistry to really understand how it all works. So we're going to show you a short clip. We're going to show you a short clip from an episode we did called Acid Ocean that'll help put this ocean acidification problem in perspective a little bit and let you know how it works. So this is a clip from Acid Ocean.
Changes are taking place in the ocean. The chemical makeup of seawater is rapidly increasing in acidity. The last time the oceans went through such a transformation, there was a mass extinction of marine life.
At stake now is the survival of countless marine species, vital food sources for billions of people. How do we prepare for an acid ocean?
We all thought taking carbon dioxide into the oceans was a good thing. But what we've learned over the last 15 years, that there's this enormous price to pay by taking up that carbon dioxide in the changing acidification of the ocean.
Just as animals on land need calcium to build their bones, many marine organisms require a similar mineral called calcium carbonate to build their shells, organs, and skeletons. But as carbon dioxide builds up in the ocean, it reacts with seawater, making it more difficult for marine life to absorb calcium carbonate. This process also causes the pH level of seawater to lower, increasing its acidity.
So we encourage you to learn more about ocean acidification. We know we're going to be short on time, so we're just going to go through here and run through some of the other big issues with water in the oceans that we look at. The loss of biodiversity is a huge water issue in and of itself. We've lost about half of all wildlife on this planet in the last 40 years. And the highest losses are happening in freshwater ecosystems because of the depletion of surface fresh water. That's one of the big ways it's happening. We're just using up a lot of water, and that's primarily because of agriculture. 70%, it's over 80% of all the fresh water they use is for food. And the world is also, we're eating, it's growing in population. We have over 7 billion people. It's going to keep going higher over the coming decades. And we're eating more, resource-intensive, water-intensive diets. Things like livestock. We showed you the virtual water diagram earlier. They need a lot of water because they eat a lot of food. A third of the world's land right now is being used not to grow food. A third of the world's arable land, I should say, is being used not to grow food for humans, but to grow food for animals. And so that's why we're losing such large tracts of land to agriculture, is because of this resource-intensive diet and the growth of resource-intensive diets. We'll skip over that video. So, one of the most powerful things we can do for the health of our planet and for the health of our oceans, of fresh water, is our diet. It's thinking of how we can waste less food. 30% of all the food we produce is wasted. It's thrown in the garbage. Perfectly good food. That's a lot of water we're just throwing away in the trash, essentially. In the ocean, we're focusing all of our efforts on eating top-level predators. And when you take top-level predators out of ecosystems, you totally change how they work. They're like the organizers in many cases of how the whole ecosystem works, and that's what we're doing to the ocean. That's why we're seeing a lot of problems in the ocean. So switching to less resource-intensive diets is a really powerful way that you can reduce your impact. Pollution, so many different sources of pollution. One of the biggest we talk about is plastic pollution. We really encourage you to think differently about the single-use disposable plastics you consume on a daily basis. We have 300 million tons of plastic being produced every year. And a lot of that's ending up in the ocean. Most of it's not being recycled. A lot of that plastic is being consumed in countries where they don't even have recycling, or you don't even really have formal, garbage disposal systems. And, we have trillions of plastic particles on the ocean surface, that are causing entanglements, being ingested by things like seabirds and fish, and working their way up the food chain. To go into this, we did a whole episode where we went across the North Pacific, a place known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And really the big revelation of that whole trip is that it's not just a garbage patch in the North Pacific. The entire ocean is filling up with plastic. It's everywhere. It breaks down into such small pieces, and it sort of explodes across the whole ocean. And it's so that they're such small pieces once they enter the ocean, once they break up from waves and sunlight, that there's no means of cleaning it up effectively. The only thing we can do to solve this problem is stop the flow of plastic into the oceans in the first place, and to help developing countries create effective ways of recycling, of capturing the plastic they do produce.
But it's not just our oceans. It's also here in Canada, and a lot of on the Great Lakes, they're filling up with plastic too. And a lot of it comes down to the products we use. not using products that break down naturally. This is an image of a flushable wipe. They're referred to as flushable wipes, but they're not flushable. They're made of plastic. They don't biodegrade, and they can, once you flush them down the toilet, they'll clog up sewer systems. They can end up back in our rivers and lakes. A lot of products have microbeads. Thankfully, Canada has started phasing them out. But really, one thing we want you to know is don't treat your toilet like a garbage can.
Or your sink, or your any drain.
There's only three things that should ever go down your toilet. That's poo, pee, and toilet paper. Number 1, number 2, and toilet paper. Nothing else should ever go down your toilet.
And so these are some of the ways that our oceans are filling up with plastic. We have these very troublesome types of plastic that are very small, like the microbeads. Which enter the ocean already the size of fish food. And then we also have a lot of plastic that we use for 30 seconds, like a coffee stir or a straw, that lasts for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's how we get a whole of something as big as the ocean filling up with plastic. And we're all connected to this problem as well. So that's what we have to really remember about water, is that we're all interconnected. So when we solve, say, one issue in our own our own backyards, that can only be effective if we also get all other communities that share that water to participate as well. That's what we have to remember with water. We're all connected to these issues. A lot of them are global in scale, like plastic. So we have to work together on them, because that's the message, really. All of us share the same water, past, present, and future. And how we care for water today is going to have lasting implications long into the future, long after you and I are all, gone off this planet. So, that's what we have to remember. We really do have to work together, and water can help us, cooperate and solve a lot of these challenges. We will quickly go through them. What we want you to think about when it comes to solving water issues, we got to stop thinking small. Turning off the shower, turning off the tap when you brush your teeth, taking shorter showers, those are great things. You should do them. But we got to think bigger. We need bigger solutions, like changing our diets. These are harder solutions, but you'll see here, 10 hamburgers requires the same amount of water that you will use in a year's worth of showers. That's 1 shower a day, 365 days a year. That's the same amount of water. So just think about that. Taking a shorter shower is good, but, eating, 1 less hamburger a week is going to do far more than taking a shorter shower. Think about how you can eat sustainable seafood. Use those reference guides that you can download on your smartphone when you're making decisions about what seafood to eat.
It's not just about, with your parents installing energy efficient appliances. It's about putting pressure on our governments to transition to more renewable energy, to transfer out of sort of fossil fuels, putting prices on carbon emissions, making big and sustainable investments into our water infrastructure networks. These are sort of like the veins of our cities, is how we move water and sewage around. Systems are getting old and outdated, and we need to reinvest in them, because if they break down, municipalities stop working, and whole cities can really come to a halt. So that's another thing. And what we want you guys to know and really think about, this goes for the American classrooms as well, is water is our North American identity, Canadian identity, really. We use our waterways to explore this country. Our First Nations are deeply connected to water and have a respect for it that we sometimes really forget. And so we want you guys to think about, when you think about your Canadian identity or your American identity, we want you to think about water and how you're connected to the land and our environment through water. And if you become better better water stewards, we're going to become better stewards for all of our environment and all the challenges we face. So,
and when we care for water better, all living things benefit, because we're all made up of the same water. So those are some of the things we want you to take away. So we're happy to answer any of the questions you have. I know we threw a lot of information at you there, and I'm sure you have lots of questions about maybe some of the other episodes of ours you've seen, or anything you want to ask us about the ocean or fresh water. We're going to do our best to answer any of the questions you have.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. That was great. And, the point that you make, that water is so important. And just today I was reading about Cape Town in South Africa. So the big city, as soon as April, they could run out of fresh water. Can you imagine what that would be like to know in a few months with the drought, you could be out of fresh water?
And that's, I think it's another really important thing that we didn't even touch on because we didn't have a lot of time, but kind of how many young people, like all the classrooms today living around the world, don't have reliable access to clean water. It's about 800 million people on the planet. A lot of them are young people. And another important thing that always gets overshadowed with the global water crisis is the lack of sanitation. So we have 2.5 billion people on the planet that don't even have reliable access to a toilet. And this actually prevents a lot of young children around the world from going to school. And it's the reason why a lot of young kids get sick in the world today and why we have big health crises in the developing world. So when you think about the global water crisis, don't just think about, building wells or, bringing a tap. It's also about building toilets. And we take that, that's one of the things, we definitely took that for granted. It was only once we've gone to some of these communities where we see what it's like to live without a toilet that you understand just how big of a problem this is.
All right, well, let's meet some classrooms. Just a reminder to anybody watching online, let us know where you're watching from and send in a question via the YouTube chat sidebar. But let's go and let's meet our first class. So I'm going to turn on Mr. Flanagan's class's mic. They're grade 8 in Kitchener, Ontario in Canada, and your microphone is on.
What is the most effective way to stop sea level from rising and help save freshwater from flowing into the ocean?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. The most effective way is to reduce our carbon emissions. That's the main way that sea level is going to rise. It's the melting of ice caps in places like Greenland and Antarctica. I think a lot of the sea level rise is going to happen regardless of what we do because we're sort of past sort of the tipping point in a lot of ways, but it doesn't mean it's too late to do anything about it. Sea levels will continue to rise, but we can reduce the amount that they're going to rise. But we can also make our countries, our coastlines more resilient to sea level rise by not building so close to the coastlines. In a lot of places we build hotels, resorts, homes, all sorts of things close to the coastline, and that speeds up erosion. So when the sea levels do rise, it actually can eat away at the shore faster because we've weakened the shorelines by building so much on them.
And exactly. We've removed a lot of the natural protections. A lot of coastlines would naturally have things like mangrove forests there that would act as sort of a barrier that can, it also is a great fish habitat. But when we develop all this coastline, we remove all that mangrove forest, which is a natural barrier that helps protect coral reefs, helps protect our coastline. So yeah, another thing you guys can do in terms of the CO2 emissions, plant trees. Trees are carbon sinks. They'll absorb carbon they take carbon from the atmosphere. So if your school, you guys want to do a tree planting initiative, that's a great thing you guys can do.
And restoring local wetlands, if you don't live by the ocean, or estuaries are really important too for making our coastlines more resilient to sea level rise and climate change.
Great question.
All right, great question and some great places to start. So we're going to go to Mrs. Reeves' class now. Their microphone is on. They are joining us from Leamington, Ontario in Canada, and they're grade 4 students.
How much water are you supposed to use every day?
Well, that's a good question. There's, Canadians and Americans are actually some of the biggest per capita water users on the planet. So we definitely use a lot more water in our daily lives than we need, and we're some of the biggest water users per capita. So I think it's something like around 300 liters per person per day
is what we're using now.
Yeah,
we can do with a lot.
And I think the UN says the amount you need to live a good life with enough food and enough water that you would ever really need is somewhere around 80 to 100, if I remember. I could be wrong on that, but it's somewhere around there. Yeah. So we're about triple what the UN says we need. So yes, in Canada and the US, there are lots of ways we can reduce the water we use on a daily basis. If you live in a hot part of the US in this further south, one of the biggest things you can do is make sure that your lawn, your sort of backyard or front yard, if you have one, is planted with native plants. A lot of us we landscape, we bring in foreign plants that require more water. We have big lawns which use lots of water but don't really soak up a lot of carbon or provide a lot of other benefits necessarily. So yeah, that's one of the doing natural landscaping is a big one. Changing your diet, maybe eating one less hamburger a week. is another way that you can really reduce it. And that's one of the reasons why we have such high per capita water use. Is we have a really water intensive, resource intensive sort of diet here in a lot of parts of our countries.
All right, we're going to jump over to Mrs. Elliott's class now. I'm going to turn their microphone on. They are joining us from Dallas, Texas, in the U.S., and they're a grade 6 classroom. Your microphone's on, guys.
We read about the problem South Africa were having with water. One solution was desalination. Do you think desalination is helpful or hurtful?
Desalination is definitely an interesting technology, and for those of you that maybe don't know what desalination is, it's a process of filtering out salt from seawater to make it freshwater. So basically, you have these really fine filters, and you have to push water through at a really, really high pressure to get it through those filters and remove the salt. The only problem, one of the problems is that to get that pressure high enough to get the water through, you have to use traditionally fossil fuels to get that pressure up, to create the energy to get the salt out of the water. So desalination is definitely, in terms of technologies, it's definitely a good one in terms of helping communities that along coastlines that don't have, they're having trouble accessing fresh water to provide them a source of fresh water. But as I said, they use a lot of fossil fuels to create this fresh water from desalination. So in a sense, you're sort of contributing to the whole climate change, CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas problem. So you're sort of, you're creating water, but at the same time, you're making the problem. You're not helping solve the problem. So
the sort of overall problem.
Yeah.
But desalination has gotten a lot better in recent years. So it's become cheaper. It's starting to require less energy. And some people are even experimenting using renewable energy to desalinate the water. So if that really takes off, if that proves to be possible, then sure, that would be a great solution. But one of the problems with desalination is that most of the water we use, like we said, 70% of water on the planet, fresh water used by humans, is for agriculture. And it's very difficult to desalinate water at a rate that's cheap enough to grow food and keep food cheap enough so that we can all afford it, right? So that's one of the problems with desalination. And another one is that when you get you take all the salt out of the water, where do you put the salt? In a lot of cases, they put the salt right back into the ocean. And so those areas around the desalination plants along the coastline become too salty for a lot of wildlife, a lot of marine life. So that's another problem with desalination. And one other thing that we think should be used in addition to desalination is wastewater recycling. So that's taking the water that comes out of our drains and our toilets and our showers and our bathtubs and recycling that and then using that again before it gets put back into our rivers or lakes or into the ocean. So wastewater recycling is another really interesting technology that we encourage you all to learn more about because we don't have enough time to talk about it now. But that is a way that we can create water that is cheap enough. We can recycle water that is cheap enough to be used on farmland, and it's being done all over the world already. But we think it's something that could be done even more.
Yeah, so definitely look into wastewater recycling.
Yeah.
All right, great question and a great answer, guys. We are going to Anaheim, California now. We're going to visit Mrs. Lusky's classroom. Their microphone is now on, and they are a grade 5 classroom.
All right.
What inspired you to learn about water?
Oh, that's a great question. There's so much. There's not one particular thing that inspired us to learn about and to care about water. Alex and I, we grew up in a city called Toronto, which is right on the shores of Lake Ontario. So it's part of the Great Lakes. So we grew up with massive lakes all around us. As I mentioned earlier, in Canada, we're blessed with a lot of lakes and a lot of rivers. And so growing up, we were going canoe trips. We would learn about wildlife. We got a chance to travel at a young age and see lots of wildlife and learn about some of the environmental challenges when we were your age. And as we got older, all of those environmental challenges were still around, and it had actually gotten worse. So it was really interesting for us that, we thought, we're young, we're just starting to learn about these problems. And then by the time we were sort of, our age now, they're all just as bad or if not worse. So we really want to learn about what we could do in our daily lives and what we could do with our sort of educations. I studied film production and Alex studied environmental science in university. And so we figured, let's partner up, let's use our respective educations, and let's try and create a TV show that can help educate people about water and the importance of it and what we can do to help overcome these challenges.
Yeah, and I think it was also just realizing how water really connects us all, like we were talking about earlier. We realize water is what connects us all, and in a lot of ways, by learning about water, we can better understand the problems we're facing in the world today that you don't maybe think as a water issue. Because water is so central to our economy, our societies, our own health as well. You know, and not just the health of wildlife and ecosystems, but also our own personal health. So there's so many reasons why we care about water. It's sort of hard to summarize, but yeah, it's not necessarily one moment. One thing that did sort of stick out to us when we were young is that, like Tyler said, we live on the shores of Lake Ontario, one of the biggest lakes in the world. Yet when we were kids, there was times when we couldn't even swim in the lake. Because of little pollution issues. That the Lake Ontario's gotten a lot better since then, but it was very odd for us to live near one of the biggest lakes in the world. Yet it can be, we can't swim in it all the time. Isn't it big enough to handle a bit of pollution? So that was one of the first times that we really were affected by a water issue, and I think that played a role too in us always wanting to learn more about water issues.
All right, let's swing into Mrs. Jenko's classroom. They're joining us from West Rouge Junior Public School in Toronto, and they're a grade 6 classroom. So your microphone is on.
All right.
Are you guys somehow linked to this year's first LEGO League Hydrodynamics? Because this year it is based on water.
Absolutely. Alex and I have been, we're not officially linked with them, but because it's based on water, a lot of different classrooms have been writing us, emailing us, and we've been Skyping with them. They've been asking us to review their projects and give our thoughts on it. So yeah, it's something that we've been really excited about to help work with these classrooms, learn about what they're doing. And we've been so impressed with the work and projects that some of these classrooms have come up with, which is really good because we want you guys to be really curious about solving these big problems we solve. They are big problems, but we can overcome them. And it's going to be up to us and your generation to come up with engineering, technical solutions to help overcome a lot of these challenges. So we're really thrilled about the first LEGO League project, and I've been happy to help with some classrooms that have had questions for us about it. So if you guys have any questions, you can definitely email us at our website, and we'll try and help you guys or take a look and give you our thoughts. So yeah.
All right, very cool. And our final live classroom on screen is Mrs. Dykstra's grade 6s in Guelph, Ontario. And your mic should be on.
What's the most exciting thing you've seen a person do to help the water crisis?
The most exciting thing we've seen, like a solution we've seen?
I think so.
Yeah. The most exciting solution. That there's so many. Like we've looked at so many things. I think whether it's renewable energy, finding new sources of protein in our diets that don't require intensive agriculture, that uses a lot of water. I think one of the biggest, most interesting solutions though is wastewater recycling. We were talking a bit about that earlier, but sort of the advancement of desalination, in particular the advancement of wastewater recycling technology, I think that's really going to be a game changer because, when you recycle wastewater, it's one thing to recycle it to a level that's clean enough to be consumed by humans. That takes a lot of effort, but you don't need to clean it as much to make it good enough to grow crops with. So we've seen in places like Israel, in California, it's being done on a large scale. So I think that is really important, and I think getting the public to embrace that, and then also realizing the flaws with the technology and the potential health implications that might arise if we're not careful about how we expand this technology. I think that's all really important, but I think it's a really exciting solution.
Yeah, and honestly, another really exciting, it's hard to pick one person, but honestly, I'm just going to say out there generally, I mentioned at the top that Alex and I, we do a lot of talks at schools. And I've been so inspired and by a lot of students about their curiosity, about the things that they're working on and learning about, and the questions they ask about what can I do, and the actions and initiatives that they start in their schools, whether it's eco clubs or recycling programs or tree planting or whatever it may be, bio blitzes. I'm really impressed by students like you guys and what you guys are doing to learn about these challenges and help overcome them. That's really inspiring to me, and it gives me hope. So I hope you guys continue to do great work, and you guys really
just have a curious mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, we'll wrap with one final question from online. This is a class in Sparta, New Jersey, and they're wondering if you've ever heard of a technology called the slingshot that can take water molecules from the air and convert them to drinkable water.
I have heard about that before. Yeah, well, I don't know if it's I don't know if that one's the billboards, but I have come across that before. I know that in South America there are some they look like kind of like a billboard, but they capture sort of mist that goes up mountainsides, and they collect it underneath it looks like a big just sort of billboard essentially with like a mesh screen on it. And it collects the water molecules from the air, and then collects them, and then it's used by farmers and also people, just for drinking water. So yeah, that is, and there are lots of devices that do this. I've seen bikes that create it. Some people have bicycles that just collect water from the air, and then it fills up a little jug of water on the bike. So yeah, these things are out there. They are effective, but I think it's yet to be proven that they can do it at a scale big enough that's going to be able to solve a lot of water challenges. I think there are great solutions like this that are small scale that are good for creating drinking water, say, so like enough for you or I to drink in our daily lives. But the problem when it comes to so many things with water is, like you saw when we showed you the virtual water diagram, how do you, these things like the slingshot, you need 200 liters just to create a glass of milk. It's very difficult for these sort of niche technologies to work at those scales we need for agriculture, because that's 70% of all the water we use. So while those technologies are good, things like the slingshot, we need those technologies, but we also need much bigger scale ones that are going to solve a lot of the root causes of these problems, which usually go back to industry and agriculture.
All right. Well, Alex and Tyler, I can't thank you enough for today. It was a ton of fun to hang out, learn a little bit about what you guys do, as well as really what we're doing to our planet water-wise. And I know the students had some great questions, and obviously we look forward to hosting you again, especially with World Water Day approaching in March. I believe it's March 22nd. So yeah, we look forward to having you guys again. And classrooms, it's waterbrothers.ca. You can find the episodes online, so you can check out Tyler and Alex in action. And again, guys, thanks so much. We learned a lot today, and I know the classrooms enjoyed having you.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Joe. Thanks and thanks to all the classrooms that joined us. We really appreciate your questions. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, see ya.
All right. Thanks, everybody.